Now, we've just gone over the last 70 years in particular, since the end of the last World War. Sorry, I'll come to the T intersection. Which way should I go? Let's go up. Don't want to end up in the creek. Last 70 years, we've had an environment of constant economic growth, let's say. Had some hiccups along the way. Sorry about the sun. Had some hiccups along the way, but in general, reasonable level of economic prosperity, and feels like the norm is economic growth. That is 2, 3, 4, 5% economic growth is where we end up most years. Every now and again, we might have a little bit higher. And kind of only in times of crisis do we see maybe economic growth, economic prosperity reversing for a little bit. Let me just take a seat. And what's driven that? Well, population's been expanding. When I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, there was a big population scares that there's just too many people, and we're going to decimate the planet. We're doing a reasonable job at that, but things have kind of reversed, and thoughts have reversed on that, especially over the last 15 years. But yes, population growth has been a big part of that. So more workers. Skill sets, education in particular has been a focus. We're trying to build the education levels of our peoples, and generally that's increased over time. And definitely technology's increased, right? Last 70 years we moved from pre-computer age, the computer age, internet, digitization of the world, cloud computing in particular, automation, robotics, AI, a constant growth in technologies as well. And so yes, that's been driving the global economy over this last 70 years, and has been a big driver throughout the history of mankind. But in particular, those last 70 years, we've seen, especially as we decided to stop fighting global wars, that isn't a great use of the workforce, right? And often sees a lot of the workforce disappear. But one of those factors, like I was kind of mentioning, might be on the way out, and that is population growth. Forecasts are still for global population to grow from where it is now by another 25% by the turn of this next century. So that's over this next 75 years, we should get economic growth, maybe around 25% in total over that 75 years due to population growth. But that's without compounding, it's maybe 1/3% a year of growth from population on average, maybe. So it's not going to be a huge driver, maybe not as big of a driver as it was in the past. And in some places in particular, it's going to be a detractor. That is, there are some workforces around the world which will shrink. There are some that are shrinking at the moment, and perhaps going to start shrinking quite rapidly. Shout out to East Asia, Mediterranean states, Eastern Europe, perhaps, in particular. But most of the West is in this decline. So whereas population growth may have been a reasonable, mechanism for our, prosperity over the last 70 years, that might be reversing. Especially an aging population, less kids coming through, so people moving out of the workforce and not being replaced by the younger generation in the same numbers. So that's one thing that might be of concern. What about skill sets? Education is probably something where there is limits. Perhaps, I don't think we're anywhere near the limits, but there's probably only so much you can, educate. At the moment, we've moved to a system whereby there's a lot of the developed world and developing world where it's very common nowadays for young adults to stay in universities longer. Some, you go to some job postings, and for some positions, entry level means you need a master's degree, for example. So I'm just getting bitten by mosquitoes. And so that seems to be maybe turning a little bit, perhaps, but with AI, maybe not. Level of intelligence, level of literacy, once you get to, high 90%, especially for literacy rates, you can't go much beyond that, right? It's a one-off kind of growth deal. And we've seen that around the world. We've seen literacy rates improve. And for most of the developed and developing worlds, it's, up close to 100% language literacy rates, other literacy measures we might look at, like financial literacy or technological literacy or digital literacy. There's probably still ways to go there. But now we start getting linked in now with that third lever, and that's technology. And I think overall, this is what we're kind of hoping will save us. That is, this is what we're kind of hoping will continue to help us to get that 3 to 4 to 5% economic growth, sometimes a bit more, hopefully. That is the growth that comes out of technological advancements. Traditionally, technologies are slow to move through, economies slow to get adopted, but perhaps we need to start getting good at, in particular, bringing on new technologies, so that as we need to replace some of those growth drivers from population and perhaps from maxing out our educations, then we need to start pulling on that technology lever a lot more.
Now, if you're a bit of a finance nerd like me, why don't you check out my Substack? There's a link in the description, and here you'll find additional concept notes, unedited videos, community chats, and much more. See you next time.